The dawn of fighter jets. The final years of World War II revealed a harsh truth. Propeller-driven fighters had reached their ceiling. The Spitfire, the Mustang, the Zero, legends of the sky, but already showing their limits. Speeds barely broke 700 kilometers per hour, and dogfights were battles of endurance as much as skill. But in laboratories, a new power was humming. The turbojet. Compact, brutal, and inefficient, but capable of one thing propellers could never match: sustained thrust at incredible speeds. Germany, desperate to reverse the tide of war, poured resources into turning prototypes into weapons. Britain, equally determined not to fall behind, was doing the same. For the first time, nations envisioned aircraft that could climb faster, strike harder, and outrun anything that came before. The arrival of jet propulsion wasn't just a technological upgrade, it was a paradigm shift. Combat in the skies was about to be redefined. Pilots trained on piston engines suddenly found themselves in machines that behaved like rockets. Faster, heavier, more demanding, and often more dangerous to fly than to fight. The dawn of the jet age was messy, experimental, and filled with accidents. Yet it set in motion the defining arms race of the 20th century. From that point onward, the question was no longer who has the best pilot, but who has the fastest, most advanced jet. Messerschmitt Me 262, Germany's answer to desperation. It entered combat in 1944, the world's first operational jet fighter. To Allied pilots, it looked like something from the future, sleek, shark-like, and fast enough to outrun anything with propellers. Powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets, it could reach speeds over 870 kilometers per hour, nearly 200 kilometers per hour faster than the best Allied fighters. Armed with 430mm cannons, it was designed to shred bomber formations in seconds. A single pass could cripple a B-17 squadron. But the Me 262 was far from perfect. Its engines were fragile, lasting barely 25 flight hours before burning out. Fuel shortages crippled operations, and Hitler himself delayed its deployment by insisting it be used as a bomber rather than a pure interceptor. In combat, when it appeared, it terrified Allied crews. Pilots called it the Stormbird, yet numbers were too small and maintenance too difficult. Only about 1,400 were built, and fewer than 300 saw combat. The Me 262 proved one thing: jet fighters worked. They were not science fiction, they were the future. The Allies won the war, but they understood the warning. The next conflict would be fought in the age of jets. Gloster Meteor. While Germany rushed out the Me 262 in desperation, Britain moved with caution. The result was the Gloster Meteor, the first Allied jet fighter to enter service. Its first combat mission came in July 1944, not against German jets, but against the infamous V-1 flying bombs. The Meteor proved fast enough to chase them down, sometimes even tipping them mid-air with its wing to disable their gyroscopes. A strange role, but one that introduced jet warfare to the skies over Europe. The Meteor was slower than the Me 262, about 670 kilometers per hour compared to nearly 900 kilometers per hour. But it had one decisive advantage: reliability. Its Rolls-Royce Welland engines could be maintained, repaired, and mass-produced, something Germany's fragile Junkers Jumo 004s could never achieve. Though it never clashed with the Me 262 directly, the Meteor gave Allied pilots and engineers something equally valuable: experience. Over 3,800 were built, serving in air forces across Europe, the Middle East, and South America. It even fought in the Korean War, although quickly outclassed by newer designs. But perhaps the Meteor's greatest role was not in combat, but in experimentation. It became the test platform for new jet engines, pressurized cockpits, ejection seats, and even radar systems. In a sense, the Meteor was less a killer and more a laboratory with wings, a stepping stone that carried aviation safely into the jet age. Germany's Me 262 may have been the flash of lightning, but the Meteor was the steady fire that kept burning, proving jets could not only be revolutionary, but also practical. F-86 Sabre. The 1950s brought the first true proving ground for jet fighters, the Korean War. At its center stood the North American F-86 Sabre, the jet that defined an era. First flown in 1947, the Sabre was sleek, swept-winged, and fast, capable of breaking the sound barrier in a dive. It carried 6.50 caliber machine guns, and more importantly, it carried confidence. This was America's answer to the Soviet jet threat. In Korea, the Sabre's mission was clear: protect U.S. bombers from Soviet-designed MiG-15. The battles that followed were the first great jet versus jet duels in history. MiG Alley, the skies over the Yalu River, became a deadly arena where speed, maneuverability, and pilot skill were tested daily. The F-86 had advantages: advanced gun sights, excellent handling at high speeds, and better training for its pilots. Against the MiG-15, it often came down to who spotted whom first. Statistics remain debated, but U.S. sources claimed a 10-to-1 kill ratio in favor of the Sabre. Even if inflated, there's no doubt the F-86 dominated the skies enough to keep Allied bombers safe and to cement its reputation as one of the most successful fighters of the early Cold War. Beyond Korea, the Sabre became a global jet. Nearly 10,000 were built, serving in dozens of air forces from Canada to Japan, Pakistan to Germany. For a generation, the silhouette of the Sabre symbolized modern air power. The Sabre wasn't just a fighter. It was proof that jet warfare had matured, that nations could build, deploy, and sustain thousands of jets worldwide. It was the start of a global arms race that would only grow faster. MiG-15. If the F-86 Sabre was the pride of the West, the MiG-15 was the shock of the East. First flown in 1947, just months after the Sabre, the Soviet jet stunned Western intelligence. It was fast, powerful, and most importantly, mass-produced at breathtaking speed. The MiG-15 carried swept wings, a German-inspired design, and a powerful Klimov VK-1 engine based on a British Rolls-Royce design. In level flight, it could match or even exceed the Sabre's performance, climbing higher and faster. Its armament was brutal: a 37mm cannon and two 23mm cannons. These weapons weren't designed for dogfights. They were designed to obliterate heavy bombers. A single hit could tear a B-29 apart. When the Korean War erupted, the MiG-15 appeared suddenly, flying in tight formations over the Yalu River. For UN pilots, it was a nightmare: faster, heavier hitting, and flown by experienced Soviet pilots. Though officially, Moscow denied their involvement. The battles between MiG-15s and F-86s were the first true jet versus jet war, and the results were far from one-sided. While the Sabre eventually proved more versatile, the MiG was a terrifying adversary. It forced the U.S. to rethink air combat, pilot training, and jet technology. Over 12,000 MiG-15s were built, making it one of the most produced jet fighters in history. It equipped not only the Soviet Union, but also China, North Korea, and Eastern Bloc nations. For decades, it was the face of communist air power. If the Sabre symbolized Western dominance, the MiG-15 symbolized balance. It proved the Cold War would not be a one-sided race. From now on, every new fighter jet would have a rival waiting across the Iron Curtain. F-4 Phantom II. By the 1960s, jet combat had entered a new stage. Enter the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II, one of the most iconic fighters of the Cold War. First flown in 1958, the Phantom was huge by fighter standards. Twin engines, 2 crew members, massive payload capacity. It could climb to 60,000 feet, reach Mach 2, and carry more than 8 tons of weapons. The message was clear: this was not just a fighter, it was an arsenal with wings. The Phantom became America's primary air superiority fighter during the Vietnam War. Armed mainly with radar-guided and heat-seeking missiles, It represented a new philosophy. Dogfights were obsolete. The future of air combat would be decided beyond visual range, with electronics and missiles replacing machine guns. But Vietnam proved that theory dangerously wrong. Early missile technology was unreliable, often failing to hit even slow targets. Pilots trained only for missile combat suddenly found themselves in close-range dogfights against nimble MiG-17 and MiG-21s. The Phantom, powerful but heavy, struggled, and worst of all, early Phantoms had no internal cannon. U.S. pilots were forced to rely on missiles that missed more often than they hit. Eventually, later variants added a 20mm Vulcan cannon, but the lesson was clear. Air combat was not evolving as smoothly as predicted. Despite its flaws, the F-4 was a beast. It served not only the U.S., but also allies from Israel to Japan, Germany to Iran. It became a Cold War workhorse, flying in countless conflicts, from Vietnam to the Arab-Israeli wars. Over 5,000 were built, a record for post-war supersonic fighters. The Phantom was both revolutionary and controversial, a jet that tried to leap into the future, only to be dragged back by the enduring reality of dogfights. It symbolized a transition, from guns to missiles, from instinct to radar, a bridge between two eras of aerial warfare. MiG-21. If the F-4 Phantom was America's symbol of air power, the Soviet Union answered with sheer numbers. The result was the MiG-21, the most produced supersonic jet fighter in history. First flown in 1955, the MiG-21 was the opposite of the Phantom. Where the F-4 was big, complex, and expensive, the MiG-21 was small, simple, and deadly efficient. Its iconic delta wing design gave it blistering speed, Mach 2 in level flight, and excellent climb performance. Armed with a 23mm cannon and heat-seeking missiles, the MiG-21 wasn't built for heavy payloads or long missions. It was built to launch, intercept, fire, and return. A true point defense interceptor, cheap to produce, easy to maintain, and capable of swarming the skies. In Vietnam, the MiG-21 quickly proved its worth. Against U.S. Phantoms, it was more agile and often won close-range engagements. American pilots described fighting it as boxing against a lightweight with a razor blade. The MiG couldn't carry the same firepower as a Phantom, but it didn't need to. It played hit and run, striking fast and disappearing. What made the MiG-21 truly historic was its global reach. Over 11,000 units were built, serving in more than 60 air forces worldwide. From the Middle East to Africa, from India to Cuba, it became the Kalashnikov of fighter jets, cheap, rugged, and everywhere. In Arab-Israeli wars, Indian-Pakistani conflicts, and dozens of regional battles, the MiG-21 faced Western jets again and again. Sometimes it won, sometimes it lost, but it was always present. More than just a fighter, the MiG-21 was a symbol of Soviet strategy. Quantity has a quality all its own. For decades, it embodied the idea that air superiority could be achieved not with the most advanced aircraft, but with enough fast, reliable ones. Even today, some air forces still operate upgraded MiG-21s, proof of its enduring design. Few jets can claim such longevity. F-14 Tomcat. If one jet symbolizes the Cold War in the skies, it's the F-14 Tomcat. First flown in 1970, the Tomcat was born out of the U.S. Navy's need for a long-range fleet defender, a fighter capable of intercepting Soviet bombers and cruise missiles before they could threaten American carriers. Its design was striking. The F-14 featured variable sweep wings, able to extend wide for low-speed dogfights or sweep back for supersonic intercepts. This gave it agility and speed in one package. With twin engines and a powerful radar, it was one of the most advanced fighters of its era. But its true game-changer was the AIM-54 Phoenix missile. Guided by the Tomcat's long-range AWG-9 radar, it could engage targets more than 160 kilometers away. In theory, a single F-14 could track and destroy multiple incoming bombers before they ever reached the fleet. The Tomcat became famous in the 1980s, not only for its capabilities, but also for its cultural impact. Hollywood turned it into a legend in Top Gun, making the jet a global icon of American air power. Operationally, the F-14 proved itself in multiple conflicts. U.S. Tomcats flew patrols during the Cold War, clashing with Libyan aircraft in the 1980s. In Iranian hands during the Iran-Iraq War, F-14s scored numerous kills against Iraqi fighters, often against Soviet-built MiGs. The Tomcat was expensive, difficult to maintain, and eventually phased out in 2006. But for decades, it stood as the Navy's shield, the guardian of the aircraft carrier battle group. More than any other fighter of its time, the F-14 combined raw power, cutting-edge technology, and cultural myth. It wasn't just a jet, it was a Cold War icon. F-16 Fighting Falcon. While the F-14 Tomcat was large, complex, and expensive, the United States wanted a jet that was the opposite: small, agile, and versatile.